believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Perez, also known as Ricky Perez, and a great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest and my dear friend Monica Perez. She's the host of the Propaganda Report. She is also the host of her new show, Deep Dives with Monica Perez, and we'll get into her new show, what it's all about, what you can expect from it, and we get into why she started the new show and some of the personal things she's going through, which led to a conversation about a lot of really interesting topics. And these are my favorite type of conversations. You get somebody who is just as curious about everything and anything as I am, and you can take deep dives into science, biology, reality, philosophy, history. And that's what we do on this podcast. We talk about a little bit of everything. So I know you're going to enjoy some of our personal stories we share and all the fascinating topics that we discuss on this show. With that said, if you get some value out of this conversation, remember this is a value for value podcast. But if you can't give some value financially, don't worry about it. Share the show, review the show, tell people about the show, subscribe to the show on all the platforms I'm on. And you can find all those on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com, or go into show description. But if you are in a good financial situation, please consider supporting the podcast. And there are plenty of ways to do so. You can support us monthly on Patreon. You can do a one-time donation on PayPal. We have a merchandise store if you want to get hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, any of that type of stuff. We also have a new partnership with the University of Reason and the autonomy courses, which is Richard Grove's project. So please check out the University of Reason in the show description or on my website. If you're working an unfulfilling job, if you're looking to learn new skills, if you're looking to connect with a community, if you're looking to just expand or try something new, please consider checking out the University of Reason. Richard Grove does amazing work and has changed so many people's lives. You can check out his last appearance on my podcast to learn a little bit more about it. And my last and newest sponsor is Element Electrolyte Mix. It's created by Rob Wolf, who has been on the Ripple Effect podcast and on many other huge, much bigger shows, and very well respected in the health and nutrition world. And he came to a conclusion that many people are doing diets like he does and like I do, a keto, carnivore, paleo type of diet, lack a little bit of electrolytes. And it can lead to muscle fatigue, headaches, just so many different symptoms. And honestly, most of us are probably dehydrated most of the time. In the summer, we often sweat quicker than we can put the fluids back in our system. When it's winter, a lot of times we kind of just lose our desire to want to drink and stay hydrated. I personally don't drink that much in the winter, and that's something that consciously I try to correct by using electrolyte mixes, putting it in water so I stay hydrated longer and help with the hydration process. And if you're doing keto or you're fasting or doing a paleo diet, you're not taking in any sugars or fruits, any type of stuff that might have potassium or sodium, which helps with staying hydrated. So Element Electrolyte Mix, the flavors are amazing. If you're fasting or doing keto, it doesn't pop you out of fasting. It doesn't pop you out of ketosis because it uses stevia as a sweetener. It doesn't use any cheap artificial sweeteners, which many of these low sugar or no sugar drinks will use. Most of the time you'll see sucralose or some type of really cheap sweetener. And one of the first things that I check on a product, I'll go to the ingredients and I'll see what do they use as sweetener. Do they use monk fruit? Do they use stevia? Do they use some of these better quality sweeteners? Or do they cheap out on ingredients and use cheaper stuff like sucralose? So if you're looking to stay hydrated while playing sports, while working outside, or if you're just looking for a alternative to water, you want something with flavor, you want something with taste, but something that doesn't come with those extra carbs and sugars. Please check out this product. And hydration can relieve you of a lot of symptoms that sometimes you don't think is hydration related. Headaches, muscle fatigue, muscle soreness or tightness can all be because of dehydration. And if you use the link in the show description or the link on my website, the Element link will give you a free gift with every purchase. So please check out Element. You can support the show and you can support yourself and your health, and it's a win-win for everybody. The last couple things is I do have a Telegram group chat. I haven't mentioned that in a while, so please check out the Telegram group chat for all the listeners of the Ripple Effect podcast. We can share articles, we can share podcasts, ask questions, any of that type of stuff. It's just a community for people to hang out with like-minded people. And you can find that link in the show description or on my website, therippleeffectpodcast.com. And last but not least, check out the Union of the Unwanted. It's like a Zoom conference call with thinkers, researchers, authors, doctors. And my guest today, Monica Perez, is a regular on that show. So please check out the Union of the Unwanted. We live stream on Rockfin every other Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. But within 48 hours, the show audio is available everywhere, and the video is available on Rockfin and Odyssey. Thanks again, guys. Enjoy this amazing conversation with Monica Perez, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. What's up, Monica?
You're running around in all directions.
Yeah, it's Fridays. It's it's really hard to do this part-time. It's just with kids, and before I had kids, it was a little easier because your free time could go to your passion project. But now with the responsibility of being a parent and actually wanting to be involved, because I know many people would rather just hand them over to the state and let them take care of them. But I like to actually be hands-on and as involved as possible. So yeah, sometimes it requires a little bit of running around and then work. It's always like, oh yeah, I can get out on at this time because I don't have too much to do. I'll have everything done. And then at the last second you get thrown a curveball and you're running around. So it's difficult, but my other option is not doing it. And that's not really an option for me, because not doing it means I'm also just letting things happen the way they happen, and I'm not contributing, hopefully in a positive way, to fight back against all the things we constantly discuss.
Well, did I tell you that I had to take a step back from doing my daily show because of the family thing? You can't have two priorities, I've noticed. And I really thought that when my kids were like getting older, it would be easier. But somebody told me a long time ago, like, little children, little problems, big children, big problems. And yeah, and it's not even really problems. It's just me. It's like my son has Down syndrome and he just graduated from high school. And I realized that it was actually because the stakes feel, in some ways, they're not as high because the indoctrination just doesn't work on him. So I found like a public school that had a really good program, and I had no worries, like, first thing in the morning till like the end of the day. And now all of a sudden he graduated, and I realized, like, I can't just plop him in front of YouTube. I have to pay attention. And then I'm a little older than you. So my mother's super old, and this was the thing that really put me over the top is, I knew one person who was facing jail and another person who was terminally ill. And they both said the exact same thing to me, which was, the only thing I really care about are the people I love, those relationships, and spending time with them. And I realized, like, when the clock is ticking, there's no other time but the present. And I feel like my mom's 93. So I just basically want to move in with her and hang out with her. And, I'm really starting to panic a little bit, but it was just something I shouldn't even, he might get heat for doing this. But I was talking to Tho Bishop once, and I was like, what more can we do to save the world? He's like, well, first thing you have to do is take care of your own family, like tend your own garden. And I really thought hard about that. But I agree, so I'm doing something a little bit different, just trying to continue to apply what I've learned over the years in a more focused way, because you also can't abandon the fight. Like, you can take care of your kids, but if there's no world left, I think it's a big balance from like raising chickens, raising kids, and defending water rights. You have to, and educating people and sharing your talents. It's really a balancing act.
You're so right. I mean, and the thing is, that community, that spending time with your relatives, your loved ones, your kids, that really is the basis of our happiness. You start there, and having respect and love from your peers, I mean, that goes a long way. And it's like you got to kind of work on that first, and then you can kind of take the fight somewhere else. It's kind of like one of those things where it's like you can't love somebody else if you don't love yourself first, or you can't fix the world if you haven't fixed yourself first. And or even I would tell people when they were single and depressed, I'm like, listen, finding a significant other isn't going to fix your problems. Like, you have to be happy alone, and then you can share that happiness with somebody else, but you can't depend on somebody else for your own happiness. And so, but we live, and this goes to a cultural issue that I think is really at the root of many of our problems, and that's, we've kind of built a world where it's completely okay to be a part-time parent, and it's completely okay to, you have kids and then you send them off to schools, you send them off to whatever, or you put them in front of TV, like you said, and you don't actually spend quality time. And, for myself, I would always use this metaphor, even before I had kids. I believe I remember just saying like how life's a giant puzzle, and I know I'm not going to gather all the pieces by the end of my journey, but my goal is to gather as many pieces as possible, hoping that I can get enough pieces where the image becomes a little clearer. Like, I might not know the purpose of it all or the reason for everything, but I'm just going to keep gathering, hoping to make sense of things. And the thing is, when you have kids, they're doing the same thing. And either I can hand them those puzzle pieces and help explain those images, or somebody else is going to, and somebody else is going to influence them and help mold their worldview and who they become. And when we're kids, like, especially when, during our adolescence years, there's conversations or questions that are answered by adults or people you respect that stick with you forever. And either I can be that person who gives that advice or gives my perspective or opinion on something that molds their worldview forever, or it's the TV or commercials or culture or media or YouTube that is all basically fighting to manipulate the way they look at things. So without a doubt, I mean, it's almost so much of our depression, so much of our self-medication, so much of our issues comes from like us being detached from what really made us happy. My parents, and I've said this, sorry, apologize for everybody who's heard this story about a billion times on the show.
I do that too, but you have to, because there's new listeners all the time.
Exactly. And sometimes it's relevant to what we're talking about. And it's like, well, if I don't bring it up, I'm like,
I learned that in radio. Like, you have to have context and continuity. You cannot assume that people know where it's coming from. You just have to. It's a downside of this format, but you have to do it.
Yeah. And so for my parents, they came to America. They were farmers. I was born in Portugal, in northern Portugal, and on a farm. And I didn't spend a lot of time there. I came when I was 4, but we would go back every other year and spend like a month or a month and a half there in the summers. And their way of living there, their way of lives in Portugal, it was very like just old school, like kind of like a typical farm in the U.S. and like a flyover state, where just like they grew what they ate. They killed what they ate. There was big families. My dad was one of 12. My mom was one of 7. Huge families. There's a huge community of people. I remember going back to Portugal, and like just about everybody in the village was a cousin. My parents would be like, "Oh, that's your cousin, whatever. That's your cousin." And I'm like, Jesus, I'm like, what is going on here? Is everybody family? They're like, kind of, because it's a small community. So people started, I mean, you didn't really have many people to pick from. I would always joke around when my mother drove my dad crazy. I'd always be like, it's not your fault, Dad. I know you had my mom and like a goat to pick from. So, and but it's just one of those things where like, I remember being, and this stuck with me. Speaking of things that kind of stick with you, I remember being really young, and my dad's, one day being super frustrated. I don't know if it was bills or if it was work or what, and being like, "Oh, I wish I was in Portugal." He's like, "I should have stayed in Portugal." And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, "Listen, we go to Portugal every year. you were raised in a house with no running water. Like you didn't have TV. You didn't, and I'm like, we don't, it's not like we're rich or anything, but you have a house and you have a car and you have a TV. Like you look like a king compared to where you came from. And in my head, I'm like thinking like, what does he mean? Like he wished he was in Portugal. And as I got older, I started like kind of re-examining what he meant. And it hit me that it's like, all those things, like all those material things didn't make up for the unhappiness that the American lifestyle brings you. And that's spending tons of time at work. Just about all your, best years of your life are invested in some corporation who doesn't really give a shit about you, doing a job that's unfulfilling, working with people who don't really like you or you don't really like them, or equally as stressed as you are. And then you buy these temporary satisfactions, in these material things to kind of cover the pain. And I forget which podcast I was talking to a guest about this. And, I talked about how like the growth of materialism is to cover up the real cause of depression and anxiety and all these things. And it's the same way that like we take a painkiller for pain, but it doesn't get to the root cause of the issue. And if you stop taking the painkiller, you realize like, holy crap, I have a problem. Well, that's kind of like what materialism is. It's that painkiller. Like we buy these things to kind of relieve us of the pain of being unfulfilled and unhappy. And then if we stop buying shit and we realize like, oh my God, like I'm not happy. I'm not, there's nothing in my life that's fulfilling. I have no community. I have no peer. So like all these things are connected. So when you look at like the school shootings, when you look at, and COVID only made it worse because the lockdowns taking what are naturally social creatures that were designed and happiest when we're with others. I mean, think about it, right? I always, and we're both, you and I are both drinkers, so we can connect with this. Some of my best nights have been having a bourbon and conversating with my friends, and you're up all night, you're debating things, you're resolving the world problems over a drink.
I mean, I used to write, when it'd say like hobbies, I would write cocktails and conversation, like on college applications. I was already in that mindset. It's my favorite thing to do.
Well, it's funny because I connect with somebody like you where alcohol has mostly only been a positive thing in your life, where like when I meet somebody that I'm like, oh, it sucks that you just can't have, you can't enjoy it the way I enjoy it. Like alcohol, like my dad makes wine. He's made wine since I can remember. Alcohol has always been a part of my upbringing. Like it was time for dinner, he'd go to the wine cellar, he'd fill up his little we call it a caneca. It's like this little handle of wine for dinner. He brings it up and he drinks. After dinner, he has a brandy, or something, or espresso. And I'm the same way. Like I have this traditional thing where when I go out to eat, it's like I have my wine with dinner, I have my brandy with my espresso after dinner, and then if I'm still hanging out, I'm having my bourbon or whiskey with a cigar, and that's kind of, and all those things add to the experience. Like the wine loosens you up a little bit. When I would go out dating, like to me, it was like crucial that we'd have a glass of wine, because it's like you have this tension, right? Or like this like anxiety. And then once you have that glass of wine and you just kind of take the edge off, it's like, wow, we can enjoy ourselves, and we can kind of let loose a little bit, and
I mean, you can like speak foreign languages when you have a couple glasses of wine. Like I'm sure your Portuguese is way better after a couple of drinks.
yeah.
But there's so much in what you said that I want to respond to, that I want to pick up on. And I'm going to go backwards. So I think that all those things were really adaptations to a slowly evolving technocratic or civilization society. And I'm reminded of Kaczynski saying, like, we need Prozac to augment our like physical bodies to be able to deal with this artificial technological environment. And I think like the whole vibe, it was more of a natural adaptation or development that we would like have wine. And actually I think wine and beer were there to purify the water. So like you wouldn't get sick from the water. It's like preserving water and bread and fruit juice and all that kind of stuff. So like it had a real purpose. And of course, like God being who he is, or whatever, Mother Nature, however you want to think about it, you have to like it for it to work, for you to actually, live that lifestyle. The people who are going to survive are the ones who really like doing the things that perpetuate the species. But I think that that was kind of connected to the earth, connected to the natural elements, whereas like the Kaczynski Prozac thing is about disconnection, in my opinion. It's about over specialization. It's about taking, like I always said, since the beginning of time, like the man goes and kills the antelope and the mom keeps the cave clean. And I went to school till I was 30. And in the end, after I had kids, I realized I was like, well, maybe because of technology, I could kill the antelope, even if I'm not stronger than my husband, and he can keep the cave clean. He can't lactate, but so it's not really the right combination of things if he were to stay home and I were to go out. But somebody needs to do those things, and you can outsource it. You can disconnect. But I do think it's totally unnatural. And when I read Kaczynski, and when I talked to my friend Bellamy, who is a green anarchist who does permaculture, he's really of people I know personally, he's just a beautiful, brilliant writer. Like his prose is like poetry. Like this is a really intelligent, well-spoken, thoughtful guy. And I asked him, like, isn't it boring to just like, cultivate the same asparagus plant for 2 years? And he said, I actually, before I even pointed that out, I said, like, what do you get out of this? And he's like, oh, it's so creative and rewarding and interesting and engaging and satisfying. And I was like, wow, and it really, I hate to put him in the same category or paragraph as Kaczynski, because that will offend people. But Kaczynski also was a good writer, and he did not take credit for these thoughts originally, but he brought them out in a way like that power principle, where you need autonomy, you need to do something meaningful. It has to be challenging, and it has to like be essential. It has to have a necessity to it, and you can substitute those things, but it's not as good. But I wanted to go back to a couple of things you said earlier, which was that, so my dad, he was a World War II vet, and he was born in his mother's bed, basically. But like he was from Brooklyn way back in the day, but he was in a totally different generation, and he really raised me. He loved this country. He was absolutely like a traditional conservative, really classical liberal. So a kind of, the founding fathers kind of mentality. And he was really heartbroken about where this country was going. But at the same time, so he hated wars, he hated foreign wars. But at the same time, he felt that the principles that he fought for in World War II were valid, even if there were lies around World War II. I found all this like deep truth stuff in his bookcase after he died, the backdoor to war about FDR and all that. And he would, literally, like he would have tears in his eyes when he would talk about the Japanese regiment that was, I guess, segregated from the regular American troops, but they were Americans, but they were of Japanese origin. And it was the most decorated troop or division in the service. They were the most brave, and it gives me goosebumps to this minute when I think about like that level of patriotism and gratitude for this country and what it the comfort of it, the opportunity, and he just instilled in me this great love. And now, I think about your father saying I should never have loved Portugal. That wasn't even something I could have imagined, like, because the immigrants that we knew or that were here when my parents came over, there were no immigration laws. Like people came over. My grandmother, her father left her here in an orphanage and went back to Syria because he just couldn't hack it. There was no safety net. So everyone here was here because they chose this culture and they were up to the task and they made it work. And now we're at the point where I think that all that surplus that generated was hijacked by these technocrats, and now they've taken it so far. It's kind of like you were saying about materialism. I think of like the big pharma thing. It's almost like they intentionally, almost like it, they definitely do intentionally want to disconnect you from what makes you strong and what makes you strong and willing to sacrifice and not take their crap, and would have been better, easier for us to stand up to all the COVID tyranny, would have been the sense of community and this sense of I'm making a sacrifice so that my children have liberty. And I think that this moment in time that they were able to do this was a reflection of how far they've come in really gutting this country. And even just like the very the humanity of it all. And the last thing I will say is that I have found that having kids, this gets us all the way back to the beginning, but I have found that having kids and raising them, and I have a special needs kid and different experiences, has really taught me so much about myself, what's important to me, what I'm capable of, what was selfish about me as a single person, and what's selfish about you as a child versus a parent. And that in learning that, I really have discovered like the challenge there is just in parenting. And as a woman who went to school till I was almost 30, I was really trained, and my father did not approve of this. I was really trained to think of motherhood or marriage or whatever as an absolute afterthought. It never occurred to me that it would, I mean, I did want to stay home with my kids. I remember my father was just like, you can't even go to college. Like, I will completely not let you go to college, or I will object to this if you would work full time and have kids. Like, that would just, kids will be a disaster if you do that. So I had it in the back of my mind, but I just never took seriously that there was skill to it, and that how important it was, and that it was so satisfying, so intellectual, and there's so much growth in it, that I feel like I've gotten a lot out of that. And some people don't have kids the way some people don't drink, but this is my journey and it's a rich one. And I feel like when I see the next generation just overdoing it with THC vaping and friggin' mindless TikTok watching, it makes me wonder, like, what is the future of humanity?
Yeah, I mean, parenting, it's almost like trying to talk to a veteran about war. It's like they can't verbalize it to really get me to understand it the way they understand it. And parenting's the same way. Like, if you're talking to somebody who doesn't have kids, it's like it's hard for them to really grasp the love that you can have for something. And I forget who said it, but it was beautifully said, where there was this author that was talking about how, oops, my microphone's falling. This author who was talking about how once she got married and she settled down, she's like, oh, I'll never fall in love again. That experience of falling in love again and getting, married and like, this is my soulmate. And it was this amazing process of, getting to know each other and growing together. Like, that's all behind me. And then she had kids and she's like, oh my God, I'm experiencing the whole thing again. I get to go through this falling in love just process again, and just this love that it's almost undescribable. And love and that comfort is so crucial to just us surviving. I've talked about it before, and I'll probably incorrectly describe the experiment again and again, and I should probably correct it at some point and actually look it up. But I remember a long time ago looking up or running into this experiment where they had this monkey taken away from its mother, and then they had like this stuffed animal that looked like,
I know that one. It's the fuzzy monkey. I'm the fuzzy monkey. That's but the fuzzy monkey that was on a rocker, you can tell, but I know the story. I've told that story. Can I tell it to you?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So they had four monkeys. They took them all away from, or one they gave to the mother. One they gave to, they had a wire monkey with a bottle sticking out. One, they had a wire monkey covered in fur with a bottle sticking out. And the last one, they had the furry monkey with the bottle on a rope. So when the little monkey jumped on it, the rope rocked. That one swung. So the first one who had a mom was a good mom. The one who had the wire monkey, like, literally took its babies and threw it against the wall. Like, it could not be a mom. The one that just had the fur on the wire could have kids. Like, it could have kids that could have kids. And like, after this, I always thought, like, if you're a grandparent, you've probably like passed some tests, like that you've gotten over, like you've had offspring who can procreate. But the one on the rope was, I think, equally successful as the one with a real monkey. So it doesn't take that much. It just takes responsiveness. So like, I basically based my entire parenting on carrying my kids around. I was just like, if I just carry them around, they'll always be moving. They'll always be soft and warm. And, but yes, anyway, so I hope I'm not giving you the wrong punchline.
No, that's yeah, because it kind of argues the Maslow hierarchy of needs idea, like where it's all about like food first, and it's like, no, actually, comfort and love is more important and necessary. You know, we don't look at those things as a necessary for survival or for happiness. You know, and I guess happiness is some way connected to survival, because it's probably much easier to survive when you're happy than it is when you're unfulfilled and depressed. So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, and again, this is like kind of from a European, from like my parents being from Europe, and the people that I know that are from Europe or from other countries in general, because some of my best friends are from Lebanon, El Salvador. I have a lot of Polish friends, and you know, one thing that they all have in common with the Portuguese Western European culture is that they take care of their parents. They take care of everybody contributes with taking care of the little ones, you know, if you have kids. So it's like, it's a community. And then you come to America, and again, like, this is just you know, my experience and just me observing it. I don't want to say it's exclusive to America. Maybe England's the same way, maybe Canada's the same way, but America, it's like we're told that the most important thing is, you know, your career and getting a good job and buying, you know, this white picket fence. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that there's a lack of culture here. Like, there's so many cultures that there is no culture. Like, people kind of lose some of their culture. And when you look at just about all cultures, some of the most important things, rituals or you know, holidays that they celebrate, like, it's all related to gathering people. Like, my dad makes wine, and when he makes wine, it's a big party. You know, people are over the house. You know, they're working, they're eating. You know, my parents make sausage too. That, you know, so anytime they have one of these traditional you know, things that they've been doing throughout the generations of our family, you know, it's always a party. People are over, people are eating, people are drinking, spending time together. And so and every nationality seems to have things like that. You know, Polish people with the polka music and making you know, vodka or grain alcohol, or you know, my Middle Eastern friends who do hookah. You know, we get together, we smoke hookah, and I love smoking hookah because it forces everybody to sit around the hookah bong, and it forces us to kind of share and talk and discuss things. You know, that's kind of one of the things
It's probably great because it exposes you to germs,
and
which I now love. Now, huge fan of germs.
yeah, no, I'm the same way. You get during the lockdown, I would tell people, I'm like, come over, my kids need
Cough in my face.
yeah. It's I don't get germaphobes. I grew up working construction. We still run a little construction company. I'm like, if germs were really a threat, I'm like, every construction worker would be dead, because we, like, if there's nowhere to wash your hands at lunchtime, these guys don't wash their hands. They just eat. You know, like, you'll have, you know, mechanics are the same way, right? They'll have grease on their, I mean, I know mechanics, some of my mechanic friends, their hands are permanently black. Like, they're
You couldn't tell if it was dirty or not. The one thing that baffles me is that people who work in like daycare and stuff, they do get like every cold that blows through town. I don't know if kids just, you know, cause inflammation or what. I always puzzle through that. I was completely on there's no such thing as like a contagious virus. Now I think that they made the vaccines contagious, so that, you know, maybe they did do gain of function, which literally just created this, you know, made the myth real. I don't know, but I do think like I wanted to get to something you said, like immigration, college, and the draft are three things that really break up that intergenerational opportunity. People just never go back to their hometowns. Like, that's the thing with college. I'm like, as soon as I realized how much effort I was putting into having kids, it's like, wait, then they're going to move. Like, their goal is to move halfway across the country. Like, and then what's the likelihood they're ever coming back? Like, it's probably 50-50 they meet their spouse there. And there's like 10% chance their spouse is from here. And then like, look, I live 3,000 miles away from my mother. It makes me absolutely crazy. And I'm definitely like, I just have to spend that time. But I was thinking, as far as like taking care of your old people too, I feel like you want to model, like you're saying, happiness is probably good for you. And I think love is in a way selfish. So if I demonstrate to my kids that this is how we treat our old people. Like you take care of them if you can take care of them at home, or you can take care of them in their home, you do. Like I don't, I understand assisted living and nursing homes. I understand when that's necessary, but I want my kids to understand that the first pass is not to try to pawn off this person, mostly because it's such a rich experience to have that person with you. And then also, see, I told my mom, like, you have to come live with me because my kids need your wisdom. But she's not moving to California. She thinks it's like a beach. She's like, I don't understand. People live there all the time. I'm like, well, it's like the biggest city in the country, probably. So it's not just a beach. But I don't blame her for not wanting to come. But one thing I thought of was that I always wondered, why do we live till 85? We can only have kids till we're, say, 50, like females. Why do females live to 85? And I thought, well, your kids are viable till they're like 16 or whatever. So maybe you have your last kid when you're 50, and that person is going to have kids when they're 70. That's an adult. Like, why would you have any longevity after that? Yet the human body kind of is supposed to last to 85. And like in a state of nature, that's what they say, your body just kind of expires around then. And I had to think that it's probably true that your genes get carried on better if you help with your grandchildren. And then like the people who keep the cave clean and kill the antelope are out and about, and you're there sharing your wisdom and the, like, kind of low maintenance stuff that you can impart to, and that gives so much intergenerational continuity. And the kid is going to be fresh and understands fresh technology. The parents are going to be fresh and understand fresh technology. And you can, as the older person, can bring that, like what I call legacy wisdom. So for like pickling things, or that you don't have to put eggs in the fridge if you don't wash them, and how to handle firearms, and, natural remedies, like all of that stuff we're just losing all that wisdom. And even if they come back as a fad, or they change the laws so that you can have pot, or they don't have gun regulation, you're disconnected from thousands of years possibly of wisdom. And I think that's just at the heart of so much of the social engineering.
It's so true. I didn't know the egg thing. That's
yeah. Lanny and Chide of Greener Postures, man. They will. Oh my gosh. I make my own sauerkraut now. It's so easy. I make spicy pickled green beans for my Bloody Marys. Oh my gosh. And if you have if you're diet conscious, oh my gosh, I know that you don't eat fruit, but you will eat vegetables. So like these green beans, oh my gosh. So yeah, they teach you everything. This stuff sits on my counter for 3 weeks, and it does not. She's taught me how to make sure it doesn't get any kind of jizzaroonies or anything.
Well, that makes sense. I get all my eggs from my parents, and a lot of times they're just sitting on the counter.
Yeah, they don't care because it's coated with something. And it's kind of like overly washing your hands. Apparently, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think that you do have stuff that kind of protects you. They say chicken skin is full of antibiotic properties. So that's why chicken soup is Jewish penicillin. So there's some natural things that if you don't over process and don't, I think they literally dip chickens in hydrochloric acid or something before you get it. So they don't last very long. But if you can get a chicken from your backyard, do you have chickens?
I don't, but my parents do. I actually just my parents, I ordered on Amazon one of those little contraptions where you can put an egg in there, and then basically it just keeps it at the right temperature and the right humidity, so then they hatch. So
like an egg?
Yeah. So because they have some chickens.
Oh, not like an egg from the store. Although Lanny says that you can take an egg that's sitting on her counter and you can put it, if it's never been refrigerated and it's been fertilized and stuff. She says because what the chickens do is they lay a bunch of eggs and they go away and they do their thing. And when there's enough eggs in the nest, then somebody sits on it. But they don't sit on them one at a time, but they can only lay them, I think, one at a time. I don't know. I'm from Brooklyn, man. So you're going to be able to learn from your parents. See, this is what I'm saying. You're going to be able to learn from your parents. I'm going to have to learn from you. It doesn't translate on Zoom quite as well.
Well, it's funny you say that because there's so many things that my parents don't know how email works. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, they'll say something that reminds me that they're farmers that come from northern Portugal, and but then I remember one time they went to Portugal and it was in the winter, and I had to go there to shut the chicken coop, and the chickens were out on the snow and they wouldn't move. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I'm like trying to shoot them,
How many were there?
there was quite a few. I don't know, like maybe 30 or something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
Wow.
I call my parents and I'm like, hey, I know it's late in Portugal right now, but I'm sorry, your chickens are probably gonna die because I can't get them anywhere. And they're like, did it snow? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh yeah, chickens don't walk in the snow. And I'm like, they just said it like I should know this. Like it's just like a thing I should.
You dumbass.
What do you? Yeah,
You American, you.
exactly. And then there's also this time where
So what did you do?
they said just leave them out there. They're like, well, try to get some in there. If you can't, then just leave them out there. You know, hopefully, you know.
Did they make it?
I think they did. I think the snow. It wasn't a lot of snow because apparently because of their feet, they just sink and they get scared. So they don't move and they just sit there. You know, that's why I always say I don't eat chickens because I don't eat dumb birds. But yeah, I don't eat weak animals. But it's a joke. But it because my wife basically only eats chicken. But it's just one of those things where it's you know, it's just one of those common things, like you said, like wisdom that probably generations and generations of you know of farmers who probably we would consider uneducated know and would consider common sense, and then you know, somebody like myself who knows how to put a podcast online doesn't know how, you know, didn't know this. Same thing with like so I forget what it's called, there's a word for it, but where you can take one tree and then you can take a branch from another tree and you can have two different fruits grow on one tree. So like you can, my dad did it in his backyard, right? He's like, oh, you want a peach from
Graft.
Yeah.
Grafting.
Yeah. And I'm just like, wait, do I want a peach from your pear tree? What do you and then he showed me, I'm like, how I looked at, I'm like, what is this fucking CRISPR? What are you going like?
Yeah.
I think it's
because probably the roots are better for that soil and stuff. I think that they took the grape roots from California. California had a grape, like the wine in California had a grape disease that was endemic, and so it wasn't making the California stuff sick. But when somebody took some plants over to France, it wiped out phylloxera, I think it was called, that wiped out all the a lot of the vines over there, if not like all of them. And then they took the California vines and they brought them over root stock and all, and they cut the tops off and put the French wine grapes on top, and they let the roots grow from the California. So I'm sure I'm butchering that story, but I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. But that's how I know about the grafting. Yeah, you can do that because it'll survive some illnesses or some climate environments.
Yeah, it's why. I mean, I have a pear tree in my yard. I do nothing to it all year, like nothing. I never do anything to it. I've even pruned it ever, and every year it gives me the best pears. And it's
really,
like, yeah. I mean, I literally don't. I'm like, I don't even know if I should be doing something. The first year, like,
was it there when did you plant it?
No, I didn't plant it. It was just here, and
they say it takes 30 years.
Really?
Yeah, I heard that the pears are for your grandchildren. You plant a pear tree for your grandchildren.
Damn,
I know. So
sure that thing survives.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Grapes are the same thing. Like you can plant, you can decide like, hey, I want these type of grapes on my soil. Like my dad used to grow grapes at the house we grew up on. Not a lot, but just a little bit. And it takes like 3, 4, 5 years before you can actually make wine out of it, before it produces enough sugar to ferment into alcohol. And so you could invest on like an acre of land, like let me plant these, you know, this specific type of grape. I want to grow this specific type of grape on this land, and then due to the soil or the, you know, climate, whatever it may be, that grape might not grow that well there. So you invest, you know, years into acre just to find out that, you know, a better, or there's a grape that would grow better there. So, you know, wine's one of those, it's like a podcast. It's a passion project, you know.
Yes.
Very few people are doing it, or at least starting it because they're trying to get rich. They do it because they love it. So it's fascinating. But there's so many things that, like you said, it's just old wisdom that, you know, I always say, I'm like, if you know, if we go into a civil war, I want to be at my parents' house. You know, they'll figure out how to survive.
I want to be at your parents' house.
So you're still in California?
Yes.
Why?
I know. Well, because my husband is the antelope killer.
What does that mean?
I'm the cave cleaner because he's out in the world paying the bills. And I could not possibly hold up to that. And he's enormous. Like so I put the kids in an elementary school that was practically free. It was like a bunch of homeschoolers that got together, it was kind of out in the sticks, whatever. And so it was very like there's no phones allowed. They even had all the way up through high school, no phones, anything. And I was totally on board with that. My husband's like, they can't, it's hard to, you're making a decision for them to really be off the grid forever because that school does, like, people have a hard time, like, just going to university or whatever after that. So we send them to private high school, like your regular kind of prep schools, and it's expensive. And I try not to judge or impose my preferences. My father was as like based as I am, I guess, if I can flatter myself in that way, but he was just like, don't go to college at all. And I said, what if I got into Harvard? And he's like, maybe. And I did. Like, so I dropped out of high school. And I was like, I'm never getting into Harvard, so forget it. And my mother found out about a kid who went from the community college in our town to Harvard. And she got me an appointment with the guy who, like, the advisor who made that happen. And I went to that community college and he's like, I can get you into Harvard. And he did. And I really did it because that was like my kind of not negotiating position. My dad didn't pay for it or anything, but that was my compromise with my dad just in that conversation. And then over the years, I was like, he's crazy. Like, if you work like a dog, like you can go places. And then I got a job as an investment banker. And what I didn't see is that it's kind of tournament theory. So you work like an absolute dog and you pay insane taxes right out of the gate and you have a jillion school loans. But at the very top of the pyramid, there are investment bankers who just make so much money. But down here, every time there's a crash, like all the middle people get fired. So if you're like a little guy who's making nothing in a crash, then you're like the guy on top later. But if you're in the middle, like I was, so it didn't really pay off. And then over the years, as I saw my husband had like a regular job, every time he got like a really great, got a new job, moved to a new place, like the tax bracket would go up or our expenses would go up or his hours would go up. We'd have to live closer to the city and there'd be no good schools. So we had to send the kids to private school. So it all seemed like such a scam. And then this treadmill that would never end. And then when COVID happened and I was like, I don't know how to do anything. Like, I don't have guns, which is really because I have this son with Down syndrome. I just am not comfortable with that. I don't have the heritage of knowing how to handle firearms and teach kids about it and be safe. And I don't want to learn, under these circumstances, but I didn't have any chickens. I didn't have any dried food. My father had a basement full of dried food and guns. I mean, he was on it. So for my kids, I'm like, I could tell them, we need to live a different lifestyle, but like, I'm not the only one who makes a decision around here. And my kids want to go to school and I'm okay with it. I hope they use it for good and not ill. And I hope that they learn something practical. I always said, like, learn a language, learn a musical instrument, at least spend your time in school learning something of value and not just being totally indoctrinated. So I kind of go along with, I decided, and I could be a little bit wrong about this. I was a little too libertarian, I think, as a parent, and just like, yeah, if you can't see the logic in what I'm saying, like, you can learn the hard way and exercise your freedom. And, if it doesn't go well, but there's a lot of dangerous stuff out there and too much freedom too young can be a little sketchy. But I do it's like I'm very apologetic about letting my kids go through a normal educational process because I know what's at the end of it. But I'm hoping that I've given them the skills that maybe they're prepared for this and they can use it. And when they get to the other side, they will be people who are in the world like we are and able to draw those connections like I want my mom to do for my kids. But in this world now, they can, because that farm life, whatever, isn't, you can ride that out until it's no longer possible because of water rights and gun rights and all that stuff that when you're not paying attention, they're going to go away. So you're going to need some people who stay in the world, who understand like what, the nobility of man, what a human being really is and what he's meant to be and what our rights are and how the apparatus around us needs to be held at bay. Like, that's why I like your friend Brian Festa, because I even though I'm a complete libertarian and don't believe in government, we have government, and it only survived this long because there were promises made to the people that there would be a process that they could use to defend themselves against this horrible, this all powerful thing. And if we're not in there using, so one of my kids wants to be a lawyer and the other one wants to be a mechanical engineer. And I don't even know if they're going to practice that, but they might not be bad skills to have on our team.
Well, you're right. I've talked to so many people where they're like, get a cabin in the woods. Don't worry about you, like, just basically like detach from the rest of the world. And it's like, well, how long can you do that until the police are at your door, or until the Civil War is happening and you're in the middle of it? So to me, it's a little bit of both, right? Like you're saying, it's a balancing act. Like, you need to detach from it, right? You can't spend. I said this during the COVID lockdown. We're spending so much time complaining and fighting and exposing corruption so we can have the freedoms to live and love and pursue happiness. And yet we're not doing any of those things because we're too busy fighting and complaining about the things that are unjust in the world, and the government overreach and all the things that were going on. It's really important to kind of have this balance. You can't get so caught up in the issues that they win, that they end up winning, because now what you do is you're so caught up in the nonsense and the corruption in the world that you're not enjoying life. And really, like, you're basically, a lot of what we do is we hope we can create a ripple effect and change the world for the better, so we can do the things that we want to do, which is pretty simple. It's just like live in a safe environment, have the freedom to enjoy life the way we would like. So, but you still have to continue doing those things. You can't keep fighting for the rights to do those things and not do those things, and then you kind of lost your purpose. You've kind of lost the reason you're fighting in the first place. So it is a balancing act. I've never liked, I just had Dave Rubin on my last episode. I haven't even posted yet. I've been kind of busy, but he he gets really caught up in like politics and what's going on in the day-to-day thing. And it's fun to talk to people like that, but sometimes it's like, sometimes it's very surface level. It's like, oh, the left, it's all the left's fault. It's all,
I know.
I just, I like discussions. Like, I had Michael Millerman on not too long ago, and I love Michael Millerman. He is the Eastern European who he kind of made a name for himself when he, I don't know if do you know Alexander Dugin? I always bring him up and assuming people know who he is, but he was considered the most dangerous philosopher in the world. One of his nicknames was Putin's brain, and he was a huge influence on Putin and the way he looks at the world and whatever. But he's
the second person who's mentioned that to me. Like, my last podcast was with Year Zero and Libertarian Institute, and he said the same thing. I better bone up.
Yeah, no, he's very fascinating. I'm a big fan of just his philosophy. He has this thing called the fourth political philosophy, and he just very, very interesting guy. But Michael Millerman, he translated, that's the word I was looking for. He translated his books, was one of the first people to do it, and then really got into Alexander Dugin. And I think in many cases it was because he agreed with some of the things he was saying. With the issues with modernity and the issues with the left and all these things. And I've proposed this on the show before, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but I think it's definitely a contributor. I think one of the reasons why the West hates Russia so much is because of their worldview and their philosophy, and they're very anti. Like, they're one of the few European countries, and it is Eastern European, and most of the time when we're talking about European, we're talking Western European, but they are one of the few European countries that seem to actually push back against modernity and some of these trends. And that might be a threat to, the bigger agendas. And they're very traditional in regards to some of their views and some of their, and that's the thing. Like, I always joke around, like, there's things about be, a progressive point of view that I like, like premarital sex, like, yeah.
Who doesn't like that?
Yeah, that's one of you could make the argument that's like kind of a progressive perspective, right? Like this idea that like, okay, historically, a lot of people have waited to get married, to be intimate, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the world we live in today. Like, yes, I'm okay with being progressive, but then some things are, I think being conservative or a conservative perspective is really important, especially with like family values. I think that's really important. Just kind of also not being ashamed of saying things like you said, like a woman is good at nurturing and a male, not in all cases, there's exceptions to every rule. And there's no shame in that. And saying that I have these skills, these inherent skills that make me in most cases, or at least above average cases, better than a male in regards to loving and nurturing, and vice versa. A male might be better at doing the hands-on stuff, or maybe bringing the toughness to a relationship. I look at a relationship a lot like, I think that's one of the reasons why we say opposites attract, right? Like if we have two people that are quiet and laid back, they're going to be bored and they're going to move on. And if you have two people that are too strong in personalities, they're going to butt heads all the time and it's not going to work out. So I think a lot of times what works is, having maybe my flaws is what my significant other is better at, and what she struggles with, maybe I'm better at, and having that balancing
The
act.
yin and yang.
Yeah,
I think the yin and yang is male and female.
Well, what is a woman, right? That Matt Walsh a movie.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet. I've seen the trailer.
It's a man with a womb. The etymology of that word works against the whole progressive movement, but yeah, it's a man with a womb. What is a woman? Well, I had never thought of that about the Russian worldview, and that's very interesting to me because I used to love Russian literature. I mean, I love Russian literature. Someone corrected me recently that what I really like is this translator, Constance Garnett. And it's just fantastic. Tolstoy translated by Constance Garnett. I mean, it might as well be like a romance novel. Like it's just you whip through it in a Pulp Fiction, whatever. And then somebody told me it's because Constance Garnett is a great writer and she just pushes it all through this English style. So I think I might have to revisit some of these books that I loved so much, but I loved Tolstoy especially, and also Dostoevsky. But that's quite old. And it was very clear there was a Russian point of view, a Russian culture. And I found it fascinating. And I see some elements of it now, like they would make fun of the bureaucrats and the mindless people. I almost feel like our society reflects what I was reading about from like 150 years ago in their society, that they already saw the problems with all of that. And just loved War and Peace. Oh my gosh. And I'd be very interested because it's hard for me to crack the code on the problem with Russia, why it's always Russia. There's I think I can think of like 2 or 3 different reasons why they would always be the problem. One is that I think that I think this is the Mackinder Doctrine or whatever, where Russia was the like kind of resource powerhouse and Germany was the industrial powerhouse. And if they had a rock solid alliance, the island countries like the English Empire, the English speaking seafarers wouldn't have a chance. They were never going to dominate that world island. And now I think that it's quite possible. I mean, it looks to me on the surface that exact thing is happening, but with China, like we've finally gotten Germany with this end of the pipeline, which just happened this year, that Merkel was not giving up on that Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And I don't know if she stood her ground or she just wasn't going to be the one who had the legacy of making that final break with Russia. But so now it's Russia with the resources and China with the industrial powerhouse. Maybe there's more to it than that, but it seems like that's an alliance that's a huge threat to the whole English Empire, America, whatever it is, US, Israel, UK. I don't know how it works, but I had come to the conclusion that they had buttoned that up because like, if you watch the Corbett thing on China and the Rockefellers, or you look at, Putin did give a significant address at Davos like 2 years ago. He was there. He was ready to play the game. And I thought those guys, to the extent it looked like they were fighting, that there was not harmony at the very top, that they were just doing that because we would need a conflict, we would be bored. It's like you said, like you're not going to have two quiet people, like that in order for the world to think that there was still like the cause for nation states or the cause for rulers, it would have to have some kind of tension there. But now, I mean, I'm starting to think that China and Russia, that the reason we were always in there, the reason that the Rockefellers went there is that they knew that China was going to rise anyway. It's not that they gave them the hand up, it's that they wanted to get in on it because better to control it than to just let it happen on its own. So I thought they had made China what it is, but it's quite possible that they didn't. They were just trying to get ahead of it. And now it looks like, and they maybe took out the czar for the same reason back in the day. And that now they're just looking at it as they realize that Russia and China is absolutely, they are not going to take second chair at that big table. They want to be at one end of the table. And if we're going to be at the other. So I've been really trying to crack the code on why they are such a problem. And I did think maybe it was the breadbasket thing. Like that's Ukraine plays into the oil and gas and the breadbasket thing. But it's quite possible that they will not ultimately submit to this dehumanizing worldview. I mean, that is possible. But of course, there was Sputnik V, which is the vaccine. And people think it's Sputnik 5, Sputnik V, that's a vaccine. I don't know what it looks like. Maybe it's made a saline solution, maybe it works. You know what I mean? Maybe it actually works. I don't know. But like, it's really a puzzle to crack. And maybe I need to look at some more modern Russian stuff. I will check out Alexander Dugin and Michael Millerman.
Yeah, Michael Millerman, he's had a few interviews with Alexander Dugin on his show, Millerman Talks, and they both have also been on Thaddeus Russell's podcast podcast. And so it's he's super fat. I can listen to Alexander Dugin talk all day just because he's so thought-provoking, and what he says kind of makes sense. Like you said, like this hatred towards Russia, like I think it's deeper than just resources. I think it is something to do with their philosophy, their worldview. And a lot of times that's the case, right? Like I was looking into, Michael Millerman, Alexander Dugin, somebody gets brought up a lot is Leo Strauss. That's another person that Michael Millerman is a big fan of. And
big fan of? Wasn't he the one that the neoconservatives all followed?
And it's funny, I asked him that question on the show because I also like Leo Strauss, but I every time you look into Leo Strauss, the neocons are big fans, and he's always linked to all those people. So when Millerman was on the show, because he's kind of an expert in regards to like Dugin philosophy and Strauss's philosophy, I even told him, I'm like, I remember doing some research on Leo Strauss and running into Peter Thiel's interview on the Hoover Institute, going deep into Leo Strauss. Like you could tell this guy really knows. He's really? He knows his Leo
Strauss.
He knows his Strauss, and so it is. Yeah, and this kind of goes into like another kind of discussion that happens a lot. It's like, what's their motivation? Is it is it power? Is it money? Is it the addiction to those things? Or is it this molding of the world in their image, the way they, and so sometimes you do research on somebody and they seem like, no, they're just kind of power hungry, just psychopaths. And then other times, you end up running into an interview with Peter Thiel, where it's like, no, this guy's a deep thinker, and he really has this thought out, and he has a worldview, and he has a philosophy, and that has to play into his decisions on what he influences and what he doesn't.
But it may be that their value system is so different from yours, like an elitist value system, any system where you think of people in different categories and that they should be treated differently. And I think that there's a lot of things like that, a lot of religions, a lot of secret societies where they treat the in-group better than the out-group. So that's like a value system I don't like. And this might versus right thing, or I'm okay with the idea of a natural elite in that there are people who are better at leadership, something you were saying before. You want to pursue happiness in your own way. And I always say, like, you need freedom because you're good at certain things. And if they monopolize certain industries, make sure that you can't get a bank charter, then, I can never open like my dream chick bank, we work harder for less. Like, I just feel like, like that would end the whole wage disparity thing if there were no charters and you could just flood the market with with people who were good at something and were barred because of these other things. But if you've got like these value systems where but instead of just like this a natural gravitation towards a like the highest use that you can make of God's gifts, they kind of want to structure it, and they feel of course that they are in that elite and that they have a license to use the levers of social manipulation or government control to make sure that the good guys, meaning themselves, are always on top. And then they take that value system and they plug it in. I mean, I feel like Hitler did stuff like that. Like they plug it into, they exploit philosophies that have value because they are true on many levels. And then you can, but if you know, you can bastardize it by just taking the target just slightly off center. So they're deep thinkers, but sometimes those ones are more dangerous if they don't have real moral compass.
Yeah, I don't think they do have well, even if they do have a moral compass, right? Like they can truly believe. Like you could put a lie detector test on them and say, do you think this is for the best of humanity? They might pass the test, even if they're doing horrendous things. I mean, there's probably Nazi Germans who felt the same way, you know? So
Probably that's what they thought, most of them.
yeah, without a doubt. And of course, not all of them felt like that, you know, and
But
there's,
most people who don't think like I'm evil and bad and selfish, like I think, you know, my mother used to think that Bill Clinton was like a sociopath. She was like, he has no conscience. You can just tell he has no conscience. And I saw him on like, I saw a headline say that he was saying like he's worried that American democracy is in danger. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it never even occurred to me that he could worry about anything but himself. Like, you know, I just think of him like that, but I doubt he thinks of himself like that. So I think the vast majority of people, even evil people, like even the Satanists, think that a God who would ask you to deprive yourself of indulging your cravings is a bad God, you know? So I think, yeah, so they do.
well, we're very good at justifying our actions, you know,
Yeah.
we all do it. And, you know, if you
So
change, yeah, go ahead.
I interrupted you, but I shouldn't have, because I wanted to hear that the thing about the moral, you know, if they don't have a moral compass, I mean, then you're in big trouble. Like Peter Thiel, like, do you think that he's obviously deep thinker, but do you think he has a moral compass
Well,
pointed in the right direction?
well, that's the thing. I don't know if it's pointing in the right direction. You know, Peter Thiel, I don't know too much about him besides obviously the headlines and the links
Right.
to people that I'm not a big fan of. And so I don't know what his true intentions are, but it's like Bill Gates. You could make the argument like he could truly believe, or eugenics, another good example, right? You can look at it from the perspective of it's evil, or you know, you have the people like now we look back at it and nobody looks at eugenics in a positive light. But if you're living at the moment where it was a public discussion and it was a publicly accepted term, and you could see how people can justify it. You know, it's like, okay, we're just trying to filter out the weak DNA, and in the long run it's for the betterment of humanity, you know. So it's, you know, again, like, so their moral compass in their perspective could be pointing in the right place, but that's kind of what the, you know, many times the elite that they believe that, like you said, it's this philosophy that they're the ones who should be making the world decisions. It's not, they don't look at it as they're suppressing people for any mean or negative reasons. It's like, no, we're just helping you guys out because you're too dumb to make these decisions, so we're making them for you, and it's in the long run it's beneficial to you because, you know, we know what's best for humanity.
Don't you think that goes hand in hand with thinking you're God? Like thinking you're the God. There is no God. There is no higher power. Human beings don't have any kind of spark of something special, something possible. Whereas I think it's maybe evidence of God, maybe evidence of just a really fantastic nature, but we have like that. I call it a moral imperative. We have these things like if it is happiness and love and stuff are just selfish ways that we interact to perpetuate the species. That's awesome. That's amazing. You know, like it's so great that love and goodness and stuff that tastes good and feels good is stuff that we like and is good for us a lot of times. And then that I feel like they deny, it's my libertarian bent where I think society is self-ordering. I feel like they are denying the fact that we're capable of autonomy, that society is self-ordering, that family is good and good enough is good enough, like to have family and community. And they, so on the one hand, if they think that it's good for humanity, then they must think that we need a God and there isn't one. Or they think there might be, there might not be, but they want to be it for their own benefit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna bounce something off you because this is something that's kind of caught my ear and I've kind of pondered on for a little bit. So, what Leo Strauss, one of his philosophies, and actually Peter Thiel talks about it in that interview, and I end up eventually bringing it up with Michael Millerman because I just like bouncing it off people and kind of getting their opinions on it. Was so Leo Strauss believed that so the Enlightenment, right? Most of the time it's looked at in a positive way, right? Like, oh, look, the Enlightenment. Well, Leo Strauss had this perspective, and I believe Dugan also believes in this, that prior to the Enlightenment, people believed in like spirituality, a higher being, a God, for lack of a better term, some type of, spiritual type of worldview. And then the Enlightenment came, and they're like, oh, look, well, everything should be kind of materialistic and surface level, and we should decide what we see is reality and there's nothing supernatural, whatever, and kind of remove and the reason for this is they kind of looked at the Enlightenment as a good thing, because a lot of these spiritual disagreements turn into wars and religious wars, and people were fighting about what is God, what isn't God, and kind of like arguments that philosophers would have, right? Or spiritual people, religious people. And they're like, oh, we kind of eliminated all that with Enlightenment. We eliminated all of it for the betterment of humanity, because now we can just look at things at the surface level and not have all these religious wars and all this stuff. But then what happened was that also sparked materialism, right? And it sparked we've lost this idea of good and evil, and it's kind of made it easier for people to get manipulated or controlled, because, and you saw it during the COVID lockdown, you see it during wars, you see it during, if you're bringing up 9/11, people have a hard time believing that there's people evil enough to let these horrendous things happen. And you see it over and over again, that people who are religious or spiritual in some sense, they have a better, easier time accepting it, because if you believe in good, then you believe in evil. Like, you have this understanding that there can be maybe some type of infinite good, and there can be some really evil people in the world, or the devil or Satan or something like that exists. And so it's kind of, it's interesting, because it shined a light on the Enlightenment as like, this is almost the beginning of what we're living in now, this idea of like just focusing on what they would call the natural world, or the surface level, and that nature doesn't have intelligence, and nature doesn't have meaning, and the world doesn't have meaning. It's just surface level. It's science. It's everything's just like this scientific view on things.
Scientism.
Scientism, yeah.
I totally never even questioned the Enlightenment as the foundation of my philosophy, what I thought was like inherently good as a libertarian, I thought the American experiment, no better experiment could ever taken place in government, because you had this Enlightenment era, great thinkers establishing a government in a place that they considered to be unoccupied, which I do have obviously an issue with that, but that's how they did it, right? So they set it up. So if that didn't work, no experiment could ever work. And I put that based, I always would say, like, these were Enlightenment era thinkers. And then I started digging into it. I was on the History Homos podcast, and they kind of educated me on it because I picked that subject. And also a listener who I've met a couple of times at meetups, and who I really like, and I've been on his show, and he's been on my show, I should say. But he has a show called The Hidden Life is Best, about Francis Bacon, who is I think, what, in listening to that podcast, it made it clear that Francis Bacon was behind this, that the Enlightenment came out of his desire, if this is all true, his desire to suppress the not just spirituality, spiritualism, but the magical, the power of magic by, and I mean, that's a funny word to use, but it's a power that lies beyond, you could even say that like CERN or what happens at the subatomic level is magic. Magic is just science you don't understand, but you can manipulate it without understanding it. And that's a magician. So that's powerful. So that's where you get that like legacy knowledge where you don't have to actually have an electron microscope to understand these principles because you know how to manipulate them. And that was something supposedly that he didn't want. And so he wanted to replace that with science, and almost from the beginning, if not the beginning, saw it as a replacement for that. And you see now we just worship it. We don't even require the proof. I can't read a slide from an electron microscope. Nobody's going to give me access to that. Sometimes they're just graphic mock-ups, like computer graphics, and they're just like, this is an electron microscope view of the novel coronavirus. I'm like, it looks exactly like the Event 201 one. It's even like colored in the same way. It's like, well, this is a computer generated. I was like, well, don't, I can't prove that. You're outside the realm of science in my world. But that it's funny that you should have brought that up after what I was talking about, because apparently they were Gnostics. And they felt that, and I'm just repeating what I've heard on that show, and it's starting to inform the way I'm like thinking about things, but haven't dug in myself, so I can't say I know this, but the idea was that there is a God ultimately, but he is bad, and that we can be like him or are like him, particularly those guys who were calling the shots, running the show. And that all of what we've seen is just this legacy of Bacon influencing the English Empire. And I would say, like to your final point there, that as the people who were more spiritual and kind of in touch with that interdimensionality, and like Christianity is angels and Jesus, and these are interdimensional beings. Like you have to be open to this kind of, I can't say magic, like I would be excommunicated if I call that magic, but I'm just saying that that stuff does deal with something that you can't necessarily prove with an electron microscope, but it does have power. And those people, paradoxically, maybe are so much stronger here. They were so much stronger on Earth in the material world during the COVID time. They were really powerful. These spiritual people who couldn't be scared because they weren't as myopic, like they weren't as short sighted. They didn't just see. So you would see like, you got to put a mask on because there are trillions of invisible monsters like shooting out of everybody's face and like trying to kill us all. And I mean, literally, like you couldn't, you were just trying to live in a 6-foot bubble. Like you were trying to be as closed down as you possibly could. And the people who were more spiritual was like, okay, I'm not living in this bubble. I will take my chances because I know there's something beyond this. And I feel like it's that kind of strength that if, Bacon was right, you have to do away with that or you're really not going to be able to control the population.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like I remember watching the Zeitgeist movies for the first time. I remember giving them out. I made a bunch of copies. I was giving them out to people. And, you see how religion could be used as a weapon. And it doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. It just, like you.
Well, it's powerful. So of course you're going to have to weaponize it if you can.
Yeah. And a lot of times I think you said it, like, it's like you can take something and then just slightly change it and use it as a way of manipulating people or use it for controlling people. And I'm like, yeah, religion, that's, you're using that to control people. That makes sense. And now you look at it, it's like, well, science is the same thing. Like it's this idea that you're convincing people you understand the world. You're the one with the knowledge and understanding. And it's like, listen to me. I'm the all-knowing. And so it's kind of the same thing. Scientists. And the thing about science is that, and I had Dr. Tom Cowan on my show a bunch of times.
Oh, really? I missed that.
Yeah. So I had Dr. Tom Cowan's, he made a name.
Awesome.
He kind of got popular during 2020 during lockdown. But
yeah.
I love people. See, you and I are very similar because, when I hear you talk, I could tell like you're super curious and you go down a bunch of different rabbit holes like I do. And I love doing that because a lot of times it's like, you'll learn something, right? And you like, it's like, okay, let me just keep this over here. I don't know how this is important. Or
Yeah, it's those puzzle pieces.
those puzzle pieces, exactly. And then it's like, okay, but there's something to this that I think is going to be important to remember. And then you learn something else, like it might be years later. It's like, oh, now they're connecting. Like I'm connecting this to this, and now it's making sense. And Dr. Tom Cowan, he was one of those people that I heard him. I can't remember if I heard him on the Ben Greenfield show first, but he was on this. He's kind of this fitness expert, and he had Dr. Tom Cowan on. I think that's where I first heard him, and he turned everything I thought. And I'm huge into health and nutrition and whatnot, but he turned a lot of shit that I thought I knew upside down. And he had such an interesting way of looking at things. And I'm one of those people that I assume I know nothing first. Like I don't assume what I know is correct. Like, so when I had Dr. Jessica Rose join me with Dr. Tom Cowan, because I'm like, hey, I think you'd make for an interesting conversation, because I've had him on a few times. His knowledge of science and the things he's talking about are above, my understanding.
You can't evaluate it.
Exactly. So you could help because, Dr. Jessica Rose knows about, she's a biologist, she's a PhD, she's very intelligent. So if something he says doesn't make sense, you'd be able to kind of call him out on it, or at least follow up on it. And she got really just fascinated with his work, his view on the heart and the way the heart really works, and his view on water and all these things. And then after, so we had a fun little three-way discussion. And then I remember I had Dr. Jessica Rose on my show either before or after, and we talked about this, but it was Dr. Tom Cowan who kind of sparked this idea that I was proposing to her. Like this, it's like you go to college, right? And you're told these are the principles, right? And these are the principles, these are the foundations of our theory of the world, right? So it's like biology, like we assume this is the foundation of biology. And then every theory afterwards is built on that. And I use the metaphor or the example that it's like you build a house, right? And you build a foundation first. So the foundation is this one shape. So you're restricted to whatever house you build on that based on that shape of that foundation. So it's like
that's a great analogy.
No, you know what I'm saying? So it's like I can build up, I can build, different rooms. I can build, maybe to the side, but everything has to start on that foundation. And never do we question, like, why don't we just change the shape of the foundation, or how about we make the foundation big? My point that I'm trying to explain is that, like, so the way we look at science, right, is all built on these principles. So you go to school and they tell you, like, this is the way the world works, and then everything that you're going to learn has to start with this understanding of the world. I like people who say, you know what, like, let's start at the foundation and question that foundation. Let's not assume this is correct, but let's question it. And a lot of times that's what ends up happening, right? It's like we talk about World War II and we talk about Hitler dying, in the method that we're told, that he killed himself or whatever in Germany. And then I get somebody like Gerard Williams, who was one of the first guests on my show years ago, who turned what I understood upside down, because I always started researching World War II with this these basic understandings of certain things. It's like Hitler died in Germany, he killed himself, and then all of a sudden this guy's like, hey, that like basic foundation of your understanding of World War II, like, that's wrong, because he made it to Argentina, and so did a lot of Nazi Germans. And I'm like, wait, well, that makes sense, because then I had this puzzle piece. We're talking about puzzle pieces, this Operation Paperclip puzzle piece. I'm like, oh, this makes sense, because I know that a bunch of Germans made it to Argentina. I know that there's places in Argentina that speak as much German as Miami speaks Spanish. Like it's like it changes your worldview. So the thing about science is that people have to understand that everything's just a theory built on these foundations, but those foundations can be wrong. Like water is very interesting to me. I've been going down these rabbit holes with water because Tom Cowan, he talked about these experiments about how you look at this water, or you play some music or whatever, you do something, like you give some energy to this water and you freeze it, and it changes the way it freezes the crystals, right? And I'm like, this sounds pretty fucking crazy. But
Yeah,
according,
yeah. The structured water thing was interesting too. But tell me, I want to do this
so
experiment.
so he yeah, so he talked about this experiment where, he would whatever it was, like either talk to it about something or play a certain type of music, and then the crystals would eventually be a image that is related to the energy you're giving it to it. So it's so again, puzzle piece. This is a puzzle piece. Well, I've had Dr. Rupert Sheldrake on the show before too, and his whole the UK scientist who he talks about that idea that it's a real study. I think it's peer reviewed, where they had these mice that they taught this maze, and then mice in a different location who was never taught, who never were exposed to that maze, was learning the maze quicker. So almost like there was some connection of knowledge. So you look at like, okay, we also understand like the human body is like 70% water. Just water is just about everywhere and anything. It makes up everything. It evaporates, it comes down, so it's recycled through things. And then there's also, and then Rogan had it was like a transgender, I don't know which branch of the military he or she was in, but really fascinating guy. And something Becker, he was on there recently, and he was showing Rogan, and Jamie pulled it up. He was talking about water. He's like, oh, you ever seen this experiment where like different pitches or different tones will make the water do these crazy things? And like Rogan was like, is that like, he couldn't believe it was real. And what they did, they had like a certain pitch, and while this water was coming out of like this faucet, it was spinning around in the air. Like it looked like CGI, like this can't be real. And it was just based on, and as they changed the tone or the pitch of this sound, the water would like change shape and stuff. It was like, and it's all,
I mean, the implications of that in an electric world is really crazy.
exactly. So my point is like, without a doubt, there's things we don't understand, and the way we look at reality or what we think reality is could, and then and this goes to epigenetics, and you look at this article I'm constantly talking about, inheriting father's fears, where they,
yes,
yeah,
trauma isn't inheritable.
yeah, exactly.
Totally.
So we're not just inheriting eye color or skin color or some traits like that, but we could, for generations, you could be dealing with trauma that neither you dealt with, your parents dealt with. I mean, it could be like your you talked about, having veterans in the family, right? You have veterans in the family. Like you could be dealing with somebody, if you have trauma, you could be dealing with trauma that was inherited by what they went through. Which
could it be with adopted people also? Do you think it's it can be inherited by somebody who isn't physically present? You know what I mean? Like,
well, this goes to that mouse experiment, and
yeah.
Where we're all, so this idea, like, so you look at the idea that we're all connected, right? And hippies have been saying that forever. We're all connected. We're all connected. And we do understand there's energy that we sense. Like, I love sports. There's momentum in sports. You can't quantify it. It's like, oh, momentum's going against you, or like the energy of the team is up, right? It's like, and then it's contagious. Like I always talk about, like when you play sports, it's like you have a guy who's a leader and he makes a shot, or he gives you confidence because of his confidence. And it's like, you can't quantify. It's like, why do all of a sudden I have more energy? Why, so like there's, or even like you talk to somebody who's in a bad mood, they put you in a bad mood. You talk to somebody who's in a good mood, they put you, there's certain friends, right? Like that you hang out with, you go have a drink with, they're the friends that you get goofy with every time you're with them, and you're always in a good mood and you're happy to hang out with them and see them. And then you have the friends that are like, oh, he's the miserable fuck who every time he does is complain about shit, and he brings down the mood. It's like, so we know that like there is some type of energy that connects us, or we feel that we can't quantify or understand. What if it's through water? What if it's through moisture? What if water isn't, and not just water, this goes back to that idea of like the scientific perspective, where like Mother Nature isn't, there is no intelligence in Mother Nature. There is no intelligence, and what if water is one of the puzzle pieces to understanding how we're all connected?
There's definitely something to that epigenetic stuff for the longest time. It just occurred to me, like you were saying, you have this foundation structure that you learn. I remember fifth grade science learning about, I guess, Darwin. I went to Catholic school, but we were taught that by then. And I remember not, I mean, it was definitely when I was pretty young. I remember just trying to do the math on Darwinian evolution. I was like, there's no way, because if you're talking about one mutation that, like, my eyeballs are totally different from like my dog's eyeballs by more probably than one allele, maybe not, but in order for an eyeball to change, every single time you have a mutation, it has to be present in all the other examples of the species, or it will not be there for the next mutation to take root. So I think Richard Dawkins had this thing about like all the monkeys are typing in the same room. And if you put it all together, it'll eventually give you a tale of two cities. But the idea that one monkey, that's not really the right understanding. But that is the understanding. It's how do you get all of those mutations on the same page? Darwin's math just does not work. It just cannot happen. And I knew that from the early on. I was like, this is just not working. And then I saw, I don't know if I read the book first or I read the article first. There was something about like how a kid can get asthma if the mother was a smoker while he was in the womb. And it's like, that's anti-Darwinian, right? Like you can't get an evolutionary, like environmental problem unless it crosses over and actually damages the kid. But it wasn't, it was like a genetic change. And that's what Lamarck's theory was. Lamarck's theory was that there was some plasticity, some developmental plasticity, I guess, that what happened while you were in the womb or even before you were even conceived could change how the genes, which genes were turned on from your parents' gametes or whatever. And I read a book called The Case of the Midwife Toad, where this great guy, Paul Kammerer, he's a really interesting guy, had coincidence theory. He was like, coincidences aren't just coincidences. Really interesting. He like suicided twice in the back of the head, whatever. And actually because they were rejecting him from the Western academic community, and he was moving to Russia because they were going to let him do the experiments. But what he found was in 10 generations of frogs, really a midwife toad, which is hard to raise in captivity, he got land toads to develop sticky pads for mating by just breeding them in water over just 10 generations. So that was obviously a subcellular intelligence accessing some genetic mutations that would be helpful in this new environment. And just the kids were born with sticky pads. And I mean, there was no other explanation. He clearly did it, and they tried to sabotage him and all that. But so I don't know what, I've always wondered, what is that subcellular intelligence? What people are just like, oh, what, God? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not saying it's God. I'm saying Darwin was invented so that people wouldn't believe in God, like that, I believe, because people were asking that question and not being able to answer the question of where does the subcellular intelligence come from. People would look to some kind of like, it's an answer that lies outside of the universe. To the extent the universe obeys the laws of science as we know them, this has to be something that, would expand our understanding of like a fifth dimension or whatever. But the water thing is very interesting. I totally agree. Water's crazy. This might be the only planet that has water on it, or that there sure has water on it. I don't know. But one thing I got from those guys, it might have been Cowan, maybe Kaufman and Cowan talking, I can't remember, but somebody in my family felt they had to get the vaccine. It was a very stressful situation, and that person just felt they had to get the vaccine. So I was on a Union of the Unwanted with you. It was like, I think Peter McCullough was there, and like natural healers, and it was just amazing. And the chat along the side, which nobody ever gets to see except for the people who have the privilege of being there. I was just scribbling stuff down, and I got like these 5 protocols to help somebody through a vaccine experience. And it was like liposomal glutathione and NAC, was one thing I did. Icing the crap out of the arm, which I knew an airline stewardess who had COVID and she had to get the vaccine or she was going to get fired. And all the nurses like were round the clock icing up her arm. So I knew that your people gave me the right advice on that, like 4 hours before, during, and after, if you can get away with it. It was just doing like the quercetin and stuff, like really enhancing your immune system before and after, getting a lot of rest. There was a couple of other things, but the only thing that I just wasn't 100% sure of, but I did it just on faith, was structured water. One of them said that your body is that the cells, what keeps the cell membrane really tense and outside the nucleus really tense, is the structured water, that you can see it, and that somebody actually won a Nobel Prize for identifying structured water. You can get it by like water in a cantaloupe or something is already structured. So raw, really fresh, raw fruits that's in there, it's structured and you can consume it, and supposedly it imparts. But they also said that if you stir it like 100 times, you stir water 100 times and until you get a real vortex going, it's like a roundup and it's like a centrifuge, like the water will structure. So I actually was just running around like structuring water all the time. And supposedly you can pour it like in your thermos or whatever, and it stays structured. Like that was the one thing I was like, I don't know if this works, but I'm doing everything in my power to kind of forestall complications from this thing. And I have to say, I'm not saying everybody who gets vaccinated is gonna, all of a sudden get half of their face paralyzed, but it was just a non-event for that person. Thank God. There was a lot of praying also. But I remember always then thinking like, I wonder if that's structured water, because the idea was that because it would make the membrane tense, it could repel the spike protein rather than, because the spike protein is a fusion protein. It wants to get in there. And that's why you get the blood clots and the microclot. Supposedly, I do not know. I'm just piecing this stuff together. I know you talk to these people who really, really know, but we just have to hack away, because what can you do? Like, you can't go to the authorities. Like, government research is completely crowded out anything else, and it's totally captured. So you just have to hack away. You can make fun of me for being an old wife. I'm an old wife now. Like, I'm figuring out those that I'm creating a new legacy wisdom, because we have to. This is the era, where we have absolutely there's just no, you cannot trust the authorities. It's sooner to assume that they're wrong than that they're right.
Yeah, I completely agree. When they're wrong all the time, it's like somebody I used to say, like, it's like having somebody cheat on you over and over again, and then assume, like, it gets to a point where like you have to assume that they're lying to you now. Like you're guilty until proven innocent. You're not innocent until proven guilty anymore. And but yeah, that's so fascinating. There's so much wisdom that I think could have been lost throughout, because that's why the whole Graham Hancock way he looks at history, and Randall Carlson and all these guys are so fascinating, because we have this idea that we started as like monkeys, and then we progressed in regards to intelligence, and we just keep progressing, progressing, and we got to now. And there's a lot of evidence to think that maybe that wasn't the case, that maybe we progressed, we had a different understanding of the world, maybe a more accurate understanding of the world and the way things worked, and then something happened, and that that knowledge or wisdom was gone, and then we try to piece together the pieces now all over again. But when you look at like the pyramids,
it feels like the Enlightenment was that turning point. Like, paradoxically, like, it feels like the most progressive thing, but then you had like the Industrial Revolution and technology, which, that's why people think aliens came and just put the technology there, because look at how foreign it is to us. We can't handle it. We have absolutely no idea how to incorporate it into our society. But yeah, I want to hear about the Egypt thing. What was that?
Well, I was just saying how, like,
that's Graham Hancock's thing, right? I gotta.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He goes. Well, he talks about the Sphinx and all that stuff, and how the Sphinx has this water corrosion, which a lot of the experts would say wasn't water corrosion. And then he had a water corrosion expert go there and confirm that it was water corrosion. There's evidence of water corrosion, which means that at some point the Sphinx was it wasn't in a desert. It was, there was water there, and knowing weather patterns, it means it must have been much older, which means that it probably was built at one time, much older by a much older civilization, and then eventually,
Like how old? Maybe.
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
Because I think what's supposed to be, is it supposed to be like 10,000 years old or
once
not even?
large numbers like that, I become like,
Yeah, right.
I'm just like, I don't, I'm like,
I think the Garden of Eden was like 10,000 years ago,
yeah,
supposedly.
yeah.
It's got to be after that.
But but again, like we still argue about how the pyramid was built. Like we still argue about how they could have done it. And when there's some people who talk about like possibly they understood just sound waves and maybe move big things using sound waves and all this stuff, because even using modern construction equipment to get those things perfect, and then you ever see the pyramid that if you make a noise in front of it, what is it? Oh my god, they actually, on a Rogan podcast recently, they showed it. There's a pyramid. I don't know if it makes a cat noise or whatever, but if you get in front of it, the way that they built it and just the way things echo, is it a cat? What the hell? I'm gonna have to look it up. And so they built it in a way where like every time you snap your fingers or you make a noise, it echoes back some like screaming sound or something. Like but it's just like it's some type of technology or understanding of sound or whatever that we don't quite understand. So it's there. Yeah, it's fascinating. So like that's the thing about science that I think it is such a problem, is that they, like every like right now, scientists, modern day scientists, and atheists, and many of these people who consider themselves realists and scientific, they think that they'll never be the few, they'll never be that period. Like we're not in that period of time where 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now we'll look back and say, wow, they were really dumb, like they didn't have we think we have it figured out much more than people previously. And it's like, maybe that's the case, maybe we have it wrong, maybe we because it's almost like we both listen to a song, we both watch a movie, we watch the exact same thing, we listen to the exact same thing, we have completely different interpretations of what it meant or what we saw or what we hear. Or you go to a bar, right, and with friends, and then you're sharing stories about what happened that night, and somebody else has a completely different story. So it's like, their world, the way they looked at things, is their perspective is completely different than your perspective. And that's kind of like the scientific thing. It's like they think that their story on what happened with that bar at those events is the only way to look at things, and that your perspectives must be wrong because they don't align with their perspectives. So it's like, we to me, it's like, blow it all up, start all over, and let's assume we know nothing, and like start building and figure out what makes sense.
Well, while you're talking, and I'm thinking about the Sphinx, and then thinking about 1,000 years from there, and I did look it up, and it rang a bell because my son would say to me that he loves the Egypt stuff, and he would say the Sphinx. So Cleopatra to us, like how long ago Cleopatra was, the Sphinx was longer ago than that to her. And it does say that the Sphinx is 4,500 years old, which would, if she was like 2,000 years ago, it would have been that 4,500 years ago. But so think about that. So like it was ancient to her the way the Colosseum is ancient to us, or more. And but when in like trying to puzzle through whether it was worth trying to figure out if there was a God or not, I decided to go back and look at the Greeks, Plato, Socrates especially, and see the questions they were asking and how they were answering those questions, to see if we had made any progress whatsoever since then. And we did not. So in my assessment, basically we did not. So I was like, okay, if they couldn't figure it out and no one's figured it out since then to my satisfaction, I'm not wasting my time trying to figure it out. I'm going to choose how to live and see what works for me. Maybe take Pascal's bet or whatever, where like act like there's a God, because if there isn't, you'll never know. And if there is, you might regret not doing it that way. But when I look back, so I think of human beings, humanity, and who was I talking to? It might have been year zero on the Libertarian Institute, saying that I was saying I had read Against the Grain by James Scott, who it was basically said that we've been domesticated, that grain was produced so that we could harvest at one time, have our harvests confiscated as a taxation thing, and we could be enslaved. Whereas if you're on the move or you're growing potatoes or tubers or whatever, they stay in the ground. They can't even know, like they cannot force. So grain was just, and writing was about keeping track of taxes. And it's just like taxation and slavery, the same thing. And it never would have happened in these monument building societies if they didn't have grain and all of that. And he was saying, and so I was like, so we've been domesticated, like we are domesticated. But what he was saying was that we haven't been domesticated. We can't be domesticated. So what they had to do was build a world. And it's kind of true, because like, I think that we're slaves now, but they cannot really truly, it's just too much effort to enslave a human being. They're not going to like permanently, you can tame them. You can put them in the cage. You can put a collar around their necks, but they're not domesticated. Their children are going to be born wanting to be free. Like, that's why it's just not worth it. It was just inevitable. As soon as technology made it possible to like, have any alternative to slavery, they would do it, because it just wasn't worthwhile. It's too much effort. And I just feel like human nature has been the same for so long. And that's the problem. That's their, big T, that's their problem. So when you said, like, think of 1,000 years from now, for the first time ever, like, I feel like looking forward, I can't imagine that humanity will not be altered in a fundamental level, because that is why they do like genetic engineering, this, cyborgery kind of thing, like AR glasses, VR glasses. This is the first gen of that. Gluing that stuff to your face. They already have the glasses. I mean, and it occurred to me that, like, with all the stuff we're doing, my kids might be blind and deaf by the time they're 40. And I was like, oh, they want that, because then they can actually implant that stuff. So then you've got, well, I need a cochlear implant. And guess what? It's going to have like the messages in there. You're going to hear, you can just have your, play your video game and it'll go right through your cochlear implants, or you'll have cornea replacement or whatever, whatever it is. They will start making us cyborgs, but it'll be even more fundamental than that, because they're working on this genetic stuff. So I mean, I wonder if we'll exist, or what humanity will be like. I mean, do you have any vision, in all the people you've talked to and all the thinking that you've done, of what 1,000 years from now humanity might be like?
Yeah, I think I think what they're attempting to do is, like you said, all these things are little pieces to their puzzle, which is like you said, seeing's not important, human interaction and touching and communication's not important, food's not important. I've had Rob Wolf on the show, and he wrote a book called Sacred Cow, and he did a documentary too. And recently, not too long ago, he was on Rogan's show, and I actually wish we talked about this on my show, but he brought it up there with his co-author about Meatless Mondays in New York, and how they're inherently trying to convince people that like meat is bad, and they're not openly saying it, but they're saying, hey, we're going to do Meatless Monday. Well, why would you have to have a day with no meat if you're not kind of planting that seed that meat's bad? And meat's bad because it's something you can kill and you can kind of feed yourself with it, right? And it's not patentable, where you get people to start eating this fake food, and you can patent it, you can control it. And there's a lack of connection to the food when it's fake, when it's something processed, when it's an animal that like my parents growing up, I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, they kill everything they eat, like they must not really like animals. But then I realized, like, it's a lot of work, and I would tell them, like, well, why don't you just go buy it? They're like, oh, I like raising them. And you could tell, like, when they took the time, like if a wolf or a coyote killed an animal, my parents would be pissed. Like, they'd be like, another freaking, a chicken died or what. And I'm like, why are you mad? You were just going to kill it anyways. Right. But it was just like, I got this understanding that it's like, no, there's this connection to the animals, and they appreciate the animals, and they want them to live, and for the time being that they are alive, live and give them a healthy food, and have them play, and not be cruel to them. And they also understand just it's a circle of life. Eventually they'll have to, life will have to eat life. And so it's, but it seems like everything that we're doing is going away from that and transitioning to this transhumanism, man versus machine thing that, it's basically the Terminator. And it's scary, but I to be optimistic, I think the further we get away from the mechanical world, for lack of a better term, into the digital world, the more we realize we need the mechanical world, and there's things about the mechanical world that we relate to or we connect with that is important. You see it now with like just the popularity of like IPAs and people golfing at a younger age and smoking cigars at a younger age and drinking bourbon at a younger age and having like this appreciation for scents, for our senses, our smells, our tastes, and a lot of the similarities with all these things are the fact that you're gathering with others. Malls are changing, right? Instead of being retail stores, now you're seeing knife throwing, axe throwing events, and arcades, more. So it's all these things that are gathering people. And I think it's because like we were told that social media and social networks were going to help us socialize and be more social, and we realized that it actually disconnected us, and it didn't fix a problem, but it created a problem. So I want to believe that inherently in our DNA of us being social creatures and appreciating and needing community, that maybe we'll slowly pump the brakes and realize like, okay, this is not what I want. I'm actually much happier when I live like this. But I also still see people who wear masks when the TV and the government tells them to, and takes them off when the government tells you it's safe to, and they just do what they're told and don't ask any questions because they don't have any critical thinking skills. So who knows? And I also think the people who are creating the technology lack the wisdom or lack the big picture view of what they're doing. It's like they're creating this technology because they might be just OCD and really in love with science or tech or whatever, and they're just trying to figure like problem solve, like, oh, how do we make the internet faster, how do we connect all of us, but they're not deep thinkers in the sense of like asking those questions that you and I would ask, like, okay, where is this going to take us? What issues is this going to spark in the long run? I think there are people who are just living in the now, and they're contributing to what will be eventually the bigger agenda without even knowing it.
I've got a couple of threads to pull on there, which is one is that's really a great point that like we actually need that. And it reminds me of, and I realize that they do scenarios because they're not 100%, like they pay people to do scenarios for psyops or whatever that they're rolling out because they're not 100% sure how people will react, and they want to be ready to achieve their goals no matter how people react. But it does mean that they are aware of that, and they know they can't, not only can they not fully control it, they can't even fully predict it. And one of the things, so they change directions sometimes, they change horses mid-race sometimes. And I remember the whole communist thing, the Russian Revolution stuff, if what I learned during the Cold War is to be believed, was that it was totally atheistic, that suppressed religion, that was their aim. And look, the Russian church survived that, and it's still there. And even the Russian culture seems to have survived somehow. I mean, I'm sure, I know people say like, no, the Russian church really fell off and it's been, infiltrated. And I'm sure that, maybe it's all true, but the fact is they had to acknowledge that they could not eradicate religion. It was essential to us. Like it's inherent, whether it really is because there's a God and he put that in there, or because we called it God because we had it in here, I don't know, but it was definitely something that I think they had to deal with. So now they try to have a Unitarian religion, or I think I heard that there was some connection between Tel Aviv and Sandy Hook for some. Did you ever hear that there was a religion there at that small storm when her early Sandy Hook stuff? Boy, whatever platforms you're on, I'm sorry, I probably you might have to bleep those, but I did think that the people at the top sometimes miss that stuff because they're soulless. Like these are the soulless people, and they don't understand the soul because they really, whether they're sociopaths like my mother thinks, or they really have, you can be born without a soul, I don't know, but they seem to not really understand the true nature of human beings. And I think you're right that the people who are actually the technicians don't really know. They're just then, and that's part of that being specialized, that being disconnected. They don't even take responsibility. But Kaczynski would say, and maybe he would say it about the technicians, but he may also say it about the technocrats, that what they stand to gain by doing these radical technologies that they don't understand the impact of, the implication of, they don't really know how to control it in the long term and the big picture, that they have so much to gain for being the guy that runs it or invents it or whatever. They say, okay, so I start a chain reaction that completely obliterates the universe. There's a 1 in a trillion chance of that, but there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that I become like king of the universe, that I become king of the world, or that I get a promotion, that there's there's a 1 in 10 chance that I get a promotion. So they continue to do these things because they cannot possibly internalize the externality of the risk that they're imposing on 7 billion people and all their descendants. So I think maybe they don't weigh everything correctly, as you're saying, because they don't, first of all, that information can't be known, and that's not all the skin in the game, but there must be many, many externalities that they can't internalize and that they are not fully able to predict or control where they're taking this.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's such a fascinating point. And it's funny because we took your new show, and before we finish the call, I want to make sure we go into, or at least you can plug in your new show.
Yeah.
Because I did notice that Propaganda Report, nothing new recently. I think your focus is now deep dive, and this show, I think I'm going to call this episode Deep Dive into Everything.
Nice.
We did.
Fantastic.
And but yeah, let people know about your new project.
I'll tell you about it.
What you're up to. Yeah, and all.
Yeah. So for a long time, so a couple of years ago, my entree into broadcasting, I had a radio show for 8.5 years, and I got basically frog marched out of the building when I started playing clips from Event 201 in February 2020. And my producer on that show and I, Binkley, were doing the Drive Time News Blast. We've both been on your show, which was like a daily news show every single day. And he's still doing it maybe 3 times a week, but we were doing, I was probably doing 8 hours of content a week, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I just have too much like traveling and stuff. I've got to go see my mom and my son and everything. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I also felt like we got each other, like we had such a really strong community, and we really got each other through the lockdown stuff, where people said like, you were a lifeline because you're this like sane person I've been listening to for a long time, and you would see it coming. Because once you saw that Event 201 thing, you knew it was coming, but very few people were exposed to that who are for mainstream radio listeners. So it really served a great purpose. And Binkley he is carrying on, but I just had to cut back. So I decided if I was going to spend my time doing anything, I was going to take just maybe 2 or 3 times a week, a big headline, and just really figure it out. Like I totally cracked the code on the baby formula shortage. And I know that seems like a minor thing, but why not use my time to like make that little contribution, make that little puzzle piece. And then I also decided that it's the most fun for me is just to talk to other podcasters and other people who are kind of have their own puzzle pieces. So I have my buddy dive. So hopefully you'll let me put this up as a buddy dive with Ricky. And then I do have occasionally my dive master series, where it is subject matter experts. Your entire show is all dive masters, basically. This is a little break in your action, I think, to have just a buddy dive. But so that's the thing, because I wanted to make some real value there, and I hope I am. And I didn't want to quit. Like I didn't want to stop. So I just thought, if I can make the most out of the time I have, then I'm going to keep doing. Then someday, hopefully I'll be back, but, maybe do something daily. But for now, I hope I'm adding some value. But you can still find it at the Propaganda Report. And I just started a new feed. It doesn't even have anything in it yet, but it will by the time this airs. Deep Dives with Monica Perez, which you can find everywhere, iTunes.
I found it actually.
You did?
I looked it up before we started recording because I was curious if it was available yet. Well, this one says Deep Dives with Monica Perez. Yeah, but it doesn't. The last episode was June 7th.
Yeah, that was just a test run of my first deep dive, and the prior shows happened to be like I fed my old RSS feed. I tried to resuscitate my WSB feed. So if you were interested in like listening to my last couple of shows to see why they were just like, you're out after 8.5 years. I would crack the code on everything, the Boston Marathon bombing, MH370. I mean, I just held back nothing, and they got a new owner, and they knew I was there, but that last couple of shows, so people could go listen to it on that deep dive.
Yeah, so it's available. I use Podcast Addict if people are.
Oh, great. Yeah.
It is available. I found it. It's
wow. Oh, thanks. That's magic.
It's
because I didn't put it on Podcast Addict. It's just magic.
Yeah, you can just search. I love Podcast Addict. You can just search, and then it found you. So subscribe. All those shows are going to be on the same RSS feed. The Buddy.
Yes, I'm going to put all that. I'm actually going to upload over this weekend all of the shows I've done so far, and I'm going to do that feed commercial free until like August 1st or whatever, so that if people want to binge listen, get the hang of it, see if they like it, and then really the only way, because I have no more premium content, I'm just going to put commercials in it and pay for the production costs. I'm just trying to, tread water and stay connected for as long as I can and strike a balance.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, awesome. These are some of my favorite conversations because I never really know where they're gonna go. And like you said, just kind of sharing puzzle pieces and kind of connecting the dots together is always fun. And you're much like myself, where you're just a super curious person. So you go down all these super interesting rabbit holes. Having experts on are fun, but it can be a little boring sometimes, intellectually.
You got to synthesize all that for being a real person in the real world who's not just immersed in COVID or genetic engineering or, the food crisis. And especially since we live in a place where you're supposed to vote, the government's supposed to be an extension of your own authority. If you and I can't figure out everything that's going on, then, that it's not legit. Like we have to be able to figure it out. But I do love that we're on the same wavelength. That's super fun.
Awesome. And I hope I gave you some interesting things to look into, like Alexander Dugan.
Oh my gosh. I have so many little asterisks on my notes. Oh my gosh. I'm going to go back to that. And I mean, some of these people I'd love to have on my show, although I hate to copy you.
No. That's we created the Union of Unwanted almost to help with that, so people can, strengthen numbers, and I love connecting people, and it's fun because we all get help. I've gotten help from other podcasters. We all get help. So yeah, if there's anybody that I've had on my show that you want to have on your show, let me know. I'll have no problem hooking you up. And also. Michael Millerman would be a great guy.
Definitely.
Fascinating. And I know you talked about ancient Greece. One of my favorite guests that actually exposed me to Michael Millerman was this other Michael from Greece, who has a great YouTube channel called Ancient Greece Revisited. He's been on my show a few times. Super fascinating. He also hosts a podcast called On Tyranny, which is named after a Leo Strauss book. And very, very super fascinating guy. I had him on, during a lockdown sometime, and then eventually now his podcast is kind of picking up some steam. He was on the Unregistered podcast with Thaddeus Russell not too long ago, so it was fun to kind of see him get exposure because he's a very fascinating thinker. But yeah, and use this show for your RSS.
Yeah, definitely. I'll give you a little buddy dive intro and have at it. And this will be one of the commercial free episodes on the new feed.
Awesome. And send me any links that you have that you want me to put in the show description. If you have the RSS feed for your show, give it to me. It'll be easier for people to find it. And I'll maybe see you Monday.
Yeah, you'll see me Monday on the Union of the Unwanted. Thanks so much, Ricky. It's so fun talking to you.
Thanks, Monica. Have a great weekend. And again, we'll talk soon. We'll definitely have to do this more often.